Dr. Clarke, welcome.
Yes, thank you.
It's good to see you again.
Glad to join you.
Wonderful. And we're really looking forward to hearing your information about technical assistance and accountability from the Food and Agriculture Organization's perspective. So I'd like to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. And yes, I feel a little bit strange parachuting into the conversation. So if I'm very much off target, please just start waving your hands and maybe I'll do less talking and just take questions. I was really pleased to receive the invitation. I do think that this reflection on how we can work better to be facilitating the development of stronger regulatory systems, I'm very pleased to be part of that discussion. Development work is challenging. There's a very complex alchemy that's required to get the right result. And at the same time, there's a lot of bureaucracy and administrative controls throughout the planning and implementation that we've actually developed over time to help us get to the right recipe. But the rules and procedures around how we act, how we plan, how we report, they did not come from the heavens. They came from experience. And we do need to keep thinking, based on our experience, about how we can optimize the rules and procedures and approaches so that our energy and our resources are really turned most efficiently into results on the ground. You know, our job in development is really special. We do have the opportunity to change the world in very real ways, and it's not an easy job. You know, but with our log frames and our delivery reporting and our reporting on milestones, it's very easy to fall into the knack of ticking boxes and patting ourselves on the back. So the idea of a community where we can speak openly about problems and about lessons learned, it appeals to me because it's only in this more critical self-assessment can we hope to get better. When we talk about accountability in technical assistance, I do like to think about it from 360 degrees. You know, food control is typically the result of the work of many agencies. And I like to think about accountability of agencies to each other, to higher government, their accountability to their constituents, the public, the industry, the accountability of technical agencies to higher government, and between donors and technical agencies. So, you know, when we're going about our job of delivering technical assistance, this issue of accountability, I would like us to think about it broadly. I had intended to focus on the machinery of development. But as I was thinking through it this morning, I decided that I would speak first maybe to specific technical areas of and what commonly goes wrong, and then maybe from there reflect a little bit on the machinery. And the first area I'd like to look at, it's a common area of work, is on institutional and legal frameworks. Okay, there's a lot that's been done and continues to be done and still needs to be done on strengthening regulatory frameworks, legislation, institutional frameworks for food control. And there are common problems that we encounter. In many cases, we find in countries donors or projects where legislation is basically transplanted from one completely different reality into the beneficiary country. We see unrealistic timelines for developing legislation.
Yes. Okay. Great. I see one connection external inbound. Hi there. Good afternoon. Can you see and hear me? This is visitor headquarters of New York. Hi, Afia Rome. Can you see and hear me well?
Yes, I'm hearing.
You're back, Renata. There was some interference there for a moment.
Okay.
You were
Sorry about
just
that.
talking about transplanted legislation.
Yes, transplanted legislation. We see cases where projects and assistants just have unrealistic timelines for developing legislation. So there's very little time for consultation, for taking on board smallholder perspectives or industry perspectives. Legislation that is ambiguous or poorly drafted or that leads to uncertainty and differences in interpretation. We see very narrow projects where, people might have gone in to deal with milk or with meat, and they find micro solutions, including legislation, that just creates fragmentation in legislative frameworks, duplication. We have unrealistic legal objectives. In other words, giving responsibility for things to institutions and entities that just do not have the capacities to enforce. When we are driven by a tick box type of accountability, these kinds of problems are bound to persist. And this type of assistance can actually take countries backwards rather than forwards. I have been in countries with projects where there are several government agencies receiving assistance from different international agencies to draft legislation. So we can have several versions of food law with completely different allocation of power. We've seen recently, we were actually, and I liked the discussion with Steve about the assessment, and I will come to that later. We were called into a country to do a food control system assessment. And in giving the background, the request that came from the country, it really did seem to be backed up by country commitment. The country had just gone through a huge institutional reform to create a single agency, and you think, wow, they're thinking about this. They're prepared to take bold steps forward. I'd love to be part of an assessment process in that country because the environment is ready for it. Instead, we go there and we discover that, yes, a single agency was formed on the basis of some legislation that some consultant working with some agency developed. There had never been discussion or consultation or evaluation of impact. So, we got there thinking this would be a wonderful opportunity for helping countries assess their system and therefore have metrics against which to monitor. Instead, we found ourselves among a bunch of disgruntled stakeholders with a new law, new authority, and a lot of marginalized old authorities that felt very hard done by. So these are examples of things that can go wrong. When technical assistance doesn't help, it hurts. And, if we think of all of the log frames and project documents talking about previous and existing assistance and how linkages among assistants, something frequently goes wrong that allows these bad results. Mind you, a lot of good things happen. I'm here because I think it's nice for us to be critical of ourselves, not because we want to flagellate ourselves, but because this is a way to get better and to avoid errors. Another area of general area that I like to reflect on sometimes is in relation to training. Now, I don't need to underline to this group that training is not the same as capacity development, but nonetheless, it's a big part of what we do, and it contributes to capacity development. When I travel around various countries, work with various partners, we can see that a lot of training effort is wasted. And it's not just that we're wasting the time and the resources of the deliverer of assistance. You're also wasting the time of the people you're training because they should be sitting at their desks doing rail work. A lot more time needs to go into thinking about the planning of training and being accountable for what the training should lead to. There has been a lot of discussion recently in various spheres about compiling and collecting training materials so that people don't keep starting always from zero. And without doubt, this is useful. This would improve efficiency. But I would like to see more attention to simply more careful planning of training in the context of a capacity development pathway. in terms of what is it that we want to see at the end of the learning path. More shared planning of training. And if I give the example of risk analysis, risk assessment training, there are so many of us, including FAO, involved in giving that training. And, you know, for all of my scathing about other people's training, I must confess that I would like to see more coming out of my own training. I think there's plenty, particularly in the area of risk assessment, as I look around and hear from different partners what they are doing. There are particularly some universities that are doing some incredibly important and useful work. But what we end up with is pockets of knowledge. We have, therefore, very knowledgeable people maybe sitting in some university somewhere that is never called in to be part of the thinking process within government systems about risk assessment, risk management. And I think there's plenty to be gained, lots of synergies to be gained if we can be working and planning much better together. And I have reached out to some universities in our networks because I take the criticism for myself as well. I think we can get a lot better and a lot more effective by planning, thinking, and working together. One of my other pet peeves about training is the misconception that training can be a bandage for inadequate university preparation. Also, related to that, while we certainly acknowledge that it is not one education that lasts you forever, in many areas we do need continuing professional development, and we do need to spend more time thinking about how we use the tertiary institutions in countries to be doing that. Many years ago, we started a collaboration with the East African Council of Universities. I can't say that the collaboration ended perfectly. We had problems, but there was an important lesson to be learned from working with the East African Council of Universities. Imagine a bunch of universities with similar training and background of inspectorates and of other decision makers and workers in food safety in a context of a regional organization that is working towards the free movement of trade. So everybody not just with the same standards, but with similar ideas and approaches. Now, I reapproached them recently on the issue of the quality of university syllabuses in relation to food safety. And when I did approach them, I discovered that ILRI had also approached them on something similar. Okay, I'd come back. My pet peeve was people treating training or not recognizing that training cannot be a Band-Aid for inadequate tertiary education in a country and preparation of professionals. But I also use this as an example of we can deliver better and do things better if several hands are pushing in the same direction rather than several donors and different agencies pushing in different directions, segregating effort instead of pushing towards similar objectives. And I think the notion of accountability of ourselves to our constituents involves us accepting perhaps that sometimes we should not be trying to do things alone and blowing our own whistle. The last technical issue I do want to flag, and it relates to what Steve and I forget, and your colleague
Spencer.
Spencer spoke about, and it is around assessment. Now, a few years ago, FAO did recognize the need for more systematic assessment, and together with FAO and using a community of regulators, we had US FDA, we had the EU FDO working with us and looking at a system of how can we develop a system-neutral assessment tool by identifying the competencies that need to be associated with food control and help countries be more systematic in the assessment. Now, in this environment, I didn't intend to talk about the assessment tool itself, but to speak about one of the reasons that we were really interested in doing this tool is to increase coherence and accountability. The feedback that we get in the countries where this has been piloted, the first thing that people say when the tool and the dimensions of the competencies are explained, many of the representatives of the different agencies in the country, they say, this is the first time I've understood how my job relates to that of the other agencies, that we're not competing, that I actually need the other guy to be able to do his job in order to be effective. And that notion of a mutual accountability, I think, is extremely healthy, particularly in the context where quite commonly it's more of a competition between agencies for donor support, for funding, for leadership of programs. And this notion of how they fit into a national system that works and the interdependence, I think, is very important. And the issue of monitoring, in using this scheme, there is a semi-quantitative monitoring. There are 25 system competencies that have been identified, and whether they are not met, fully met, or partially met is determined by a set of assessment criteria. So the tool has or recognizes 25 system competencies, and there's a total of 162 assessment criteria just to make sure we are evaluating each competence steadily against things that are internationally recognized good practice. And that internationally recognized good practice has been extracted from the various codex texts that define how should systems be working. So it is in the process of being translated and published on our website, and I do think that it is a way to encourage coherence among donors' activities to make sure that the pieces add up to more than the sum, and also accountability that donors and technical agencies like mine do leave countries better off than at the beginning of the assistance. Now, I would like very quickly to look a little bit at the machinery of international or technical assistance.
Yeah, Renata, if you could summarize that quickly, because I want to allow enough time. Are we okay to run over? Okay, sorry. Jillian is telling me we have more time, so I'll go ahead. Okay. Please continue.
Okay, from my perspective, and without a doubt, I have a partial view. And from my experience, we quite often get to countries at the request of countries and discover that there are several donors and several technical agencies involved in similar projects and doing a lot of the same things. And tendentially, we all do it separately. So in the spirit of self-criticism, I think we could and should be having more impact, and that we do need much more upstream coordination and collaboration among donors and agencies. In fact, in 2004, when FAO was among the five agencies that formed the Standards and Trade Development Facility, this was one of our biggest expectations out of the STDF. For those of you who might not know, there are the five agencies dealing with SPS-related assistance: FAO, WHO, OIE, the World Bank, and WTO, and donors that are interested in SPS capacity development. So it is a space where a lot of meaningful exchange in terms of how can we optimize technical assistance for SPS issues. And I confess that perhaps I'm one of the less popular people in the group, because that notion of pushing upstream coordination seems to be much lower on other people's agenda. And, I don't think it's because there are any bad guys in the room. It's just that there are some people who are acutely aware of the challenges for better coordination in delivering work or planning work jointly. So I go back to what I said at the front. You know, we're charged with this wonderful job of making the world better. We do need, there's so many factors at play, there is that very complex alchemy. But we are constrained by processes and procedures which should be helping us to get there safely. But to some extent, I would like a place like the STDF to be a place where we actually re-examine what works well, what could work better, and share knowledge and insights of the situations, the obstacles in different countries, work that is going on, problems that we've had, you know, without feeling the need always to say everything works perfectly. A place where we can really dedicate ourselves to trying to be better. Part of the problem, or since I do believe that since the STDF is a thing that exists and a thing that I would like to function better, it will only function better if there are at least a few heads around the table that think that kind of discussion and analysis is useful. I do find that most of the donor representatives do not come to the discussion with an openness to discuss processes and procedures, and to be brave about examining how could things be done differently. If I go to countries and I discover that there are many things happening at once, obviously there's also a problem with coherence and accountability at country level. And so I don't want to let countries off the hook, but at the same time, I think donors and international agencies should not be adding burden and confusion by poor coordination at our end. It's actually a discussion I would like to have with such a community, insights on how donor coordination committees are functioning and could function better to get this better coherence and consequences. In other words, countries that are unreliable are perhaps have some consequences for their unreliability to encourage better behavior in terms of follow-up expected actions to be having impact on the ground. At sub-regional level, and there was and is quite a lot of excitement around regional economic communities and how they can improve accountability. I am one of those people who believe that working with the regional communities is an important way of improving accountability. They have an important political role, and they can play an important role in ensuring that governments do make the steps and improve their systems. If we can find the right roles, the right articulation of roles between national, sub-regional, and even larger, and in my mind I'm thinking of our work in Africa, so I put continental level coordination to minimize the useless bureaucracy and really utilize that political power to drive accountability. There is an interesting recent example that I was witness to or a part of in some way, and that is in relation to the African Union's decision to establish a food safety index. I think it's a wonderful idea in terms of putting the spotlight and raising the bar on accountability. Countries now are held to account for meeting certain levels of improvement on food safety. One can argue that the food safety index could be improved from a technical point of view, but I think the idea of the food safety index is an important idea to be driving accountability. I don't have any magic answers on the issue of accountability, but I would like to encourage the development of that space where the development, or at least the food safety development community, can exchange ideas, discuss failures, discuss problems, discuss the need for perhaps modifying current approaches to planning and delivering and monitoring technical assistance that will allow greater effectiveness. I think that a lot of the procedures and processes are encouraging a sort of a mechanistic approach to what we do. And I would like that to change, and I think it can only be changed if we accept to form this trustful discussion, for which I would like to flag before I end, and it is the last thing, we actually do have a space where that should be encouraged. It is the STDF, and I know that the U.S. is, or has been, I think still is, a donor member of the STDF, and I think it is a place where we can learn better from each other and improve the processes that will enhance effectiveness and accountability of all of us. And that's it.
Well, thank you, Renata. Your insights are just so valuable.